yesterday's news.
Hello and welcome to Old News, the programme and podcast which looks at news stories of the day through the papers of yesterday. The second of our little holiday specials. That's holiday for me, not you necessarily. And we're delving again into the wonderful Here is the News, an illustrated Manx history by the evergreen Terry Kringle and Co. A wonderful tome if you've never dipped in. All sorts of fascinating facts about the Isle of Man. In this particular instance, I thought we'd go back as close as we could, 400 years, to the news on the island as perceived by Terry and friends in 1620. The headline, Manxman leads expedition to America. A group of Calvinist religious dissenters who set out from England 3 months ago in search of new life in the Americas have made safe landfall in what is known as New England. In military command of the expedition aboard the sailing ship Mayflower was soldier adventurer of Manx connections, Captain Miles Standish, whose leadership is being credited with ensuring a successful voyage. We have this report. Captain Standish, who is 36, belongs to an ancient Lancashire family who's had a branch at Allenbane in Lezayre for many years. He was accompanied on the voyage by his wife Rose. She is actually his cousin, and they married in the island 2 years ago. Her sister is Miss Barbara Standish, and they are the daughters of Mr. John Standish, a member of the House of Keys. Captain Standish himself spent his youth in the island and was educated at Castletown Grammar School. He left the family home 19 years ago to take up a military career. Captain and Mrs. Standish do not follow the Puritan faith of the Calvinists who hoped to establish the first successful colony in the Americas. It was while he was campaigning in the Low Countries during the war against Spain that he became acquainted with Puritan refugees from England, and this resulted in his commission to take military command of the Mayflower, which set sail in the autumn. Large numbers of Puritans have been fleeing the country because they say being forced to worship in the Anglican way is religious persecution. The Mayflower made landfall after a journey in which the women and children who accompanied their menfolk suffered considerable hardship and privation worsened by the Atlantic storms. Even now their troubles are far from over. New England is an inhospitable place, and the settlers face a long, hard struggle for survival. But a spokesman for the Standish family in the Isle of Man said today they were delighted to be represented on what would be regarded as an historic voyage by future generations in both England and the Americas. In a separate piece we read that a Manxman who's carving out a distinguished career for himself at sea has just been appointed commander of the 34-gun English frigate Bonaventure. He's Captain Edward Christian, second son of the Reverend John Christian, the vicar of Mackle, who left the island originally to sail as master with the East India Company. Last year he became a courtier in the Duke of Buckingham's suite at the English court. It is this position which has led to his latest preferment. Captain Christian has always made it known he intends to settle in the Isle of Man eventually. The Russian Castle Clock is the title of another short piece. Clockmakers from London have been brought to the Isle of Man to examine the great clock of Castle Rushen that was a royal gift from the late Queen Elizabeth. There have been claims it has not been keeping good time since it was installed shortly before her death 16 years ago. The clock commemorates the decision of the late Queen to assume control over Manx affairs in 1594 because of a dispute in the Derby family over the succession to the Lordship of Man. Derby rule in the island has now been restored for nearly 10 years, and a spokesman for the Lord said everything would be done to maintain the clock in good condition in memory of Queen Elizabeth's reign. And it's still there today, of course. Does it still keep good time? I'll leave that up to you. The Prayer Book in Manx. A new attempt is to be made shortly to get the Manx translation of the Book of Common Prayer published and finally made available to the people of the island. It will be the first book to be printed in the Manx language. The translation was completed 9 years ago by Bishop John Phillips, a Welshman whose spelling of the Manx has raised a few eyebrows of local linguists. That'd been Philly Gorn, I imagine. Since completion, there have been difficulties in finding a publisher. One of the problems has been that it is not regarded as an economic proposition to publish a book of substantial size, which will have a very limited circulation. Well, that's true, I think, isn't it? Manx clergy and marriage is another short piece. It's been announced by the Diocese of Sodor and Man that increasing numbers of Manx clergy are now seeking permission to marry. Shocking. This privilege has been available to them for the last 10 years, and it is a direct result of what is being referred to as the Reformation, the controversial decision of the late King Henry VIII to break with the Church of Rome and proclaim himself head of the Church of England in 1534. This was followed 15 years later by the introduction of the right of clergy in England to marry, but it was some time before the reform, like so many others, was extended to the Isle of Man. And finally, for this year of 1620, it seems that living standards for working class people in the island are rising. You could have that same headline today almost, couldn't you? Tynwald Court has been responsible for the regulation of wages for the last decade, and wage rates have risen considerably since then. Artisans can now expect to be paid at least 4p a day, with meat and drink included. Luxury. Masons and blacksmiths are getting as much as 6p a day, but there are claims that common labourers have not been doing quite so well. They are still getting only 2p a day, and that is without meat and drink. Would you be able to live on that? As a matter of interest, I did a bit of research, and apparently, according to Mr. Google, 2p a day in 1620 would be somewhere between £2.50 and £3 a day in 2026. Do you manage on that? Wouldn't be much of a life, would it? Inflation, work, pay, it's all old news, isn't it? Till next time, cheerio. You're gonna be yesterday's news.